Weeks after Peter Vuong was kidnapped from Smithfield and brutally tortured, police have made another arrest. Nine News was there as a woman was taken into custody at Greenacre. She's accused of giving an address to the gang which allegedly held Mr Vuong hostage.
Busted in the car park at Bunnings. Police circle the alleged key to a kidnapping. Detectives patting down 21-year-old Sarah Ilkia, removing her jewellery and shoes as they search through her handbag and nearby Mercedes.
In the quiet, pre-dawn stillness of Western Sydney, safety is often taken for granted. But for the residents of a specific property in Smithfield, that illusion of security was shattered forever in the early hours of March 9, 2023. This was not a random burglary or a crime of opportunity. It was a tactical extraction executed with a level of precision and ferocity that would leave seasoned investigators stunned. When the dust settled, a 26-year-old businessman named Peter Vuong was gone, vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a scene of chaotic destruction and a terrified partner who had witnessed the impossible. To understand the gravity of that morning, we must first rewind the clock just 8 days. On March 1st, the same shadows had gathered around Peter's home. It was the first wave of a targeted campaign against him. During that initial incident, a group of men attempted to seize him from the very same location. It was a chaotic struggle, one where Peter fought for his freedom with desperate intensity. He managed to repel the aggressors, but not without sustaining significant physical trauma. He was left with severe facial injuries and deep lacerations, a painful testament to his resilience. At the time, it might have seemed like a terrifying anomaly, close call that he had survived. However, the individuals hunting him were not deterred by his resistance. They were merely recalibrating their strategy. They realized that stealth and surprise were not enough, so they returned with overwhelming force. At approximately 5:20 a.m. on March 9th, while Peter and his partner were asleep, the silence was broken by the sound of a coordinated breach. This time, the intruders arrived equipped for a siege. Carrying heavy breaching tools and ballistic weaponry, they did not attempt to pick the lock. Instead, they decimated the entry points, smashing their way into the sanctity of the home with a violence that paralyzed the occupants with fear. The objective was clear: secure the target at any cost. Peter was pulled from his bed, barely awake and still recovering from the injuries of the previous week. There was no time to fight, no moment to negotiate. The sheer number of assailants and their aggressive posturing made resistance futile. In a matter of seconds, the young businessman was overpowered and dragged from the room. His partner, frozen in a nightmare, could only watch as he was bundled out of the house and forced into a waiting vehicle. As the taillights faded into the suburban gloom, a terrifying question hung in the air. Why was this happening? The vehicle carrying Peter sped away, covering nearly 18 kilometers across the city. They were heading toward a destination that would serve as a grim holding cell for the days to come. This wasn't just a crime. It was the opening move in a high-stakes game involving the shadowy world of digital currency and organized criminal enterprises. Peter had been taken, but as investigators would soon uncover, the true target of this operation might have been someone else entirely. The vehicle eventually slowed, navigating the urban sprawl to arrive at a destination that stood in stark contrast to the quiet suburb Peter had been taken from. The location was a derelict, abandoned property on Canterbury Road in Belmore, a suburb roughly 18 kilometers from the site of the abduction. From the outside, the house was a crumbling shell, a forgotten structure in a busy city. But inside, it was transformed into a fortress of confinement. This decrepit space would become Peter's entire world for the next 6 agonizing days, a period characterized by darkness, isolation, and unimaginable suffering. Once inside, the situation escalated from a kidnapping into a systematic dismantling of the victim's spirit. Peter was bound and deprived of his sight, leaving him disoriented and at the mercy of his captors. What occurred within those walls was not merely confinement. It was a calculated campaign of severe physical coercion designed to send a message. The individuals holding him were not interested in preserving his well-being. They were intent on demonstrating their ruthlessness. In acts of extreme severity, they utilized tools typically found in a workshop, specifically pliers, to inflict permanent damage to Peter's dental structure. The pain was methodical, compounded by the terrifying presence of a firearm, which at one point was forced into the victim's mouth as a tool of ultimate intimidation. Crucially, this violence was not performed in a vacuum. It was a performance. The captors documented the severe mistreatment, capturing photographs and video footage of the victim's distress. These were not trophies, but leverage. The harrowing digital files were transmitted to the outside world as proof of the group's intent. They needed the recipient to know that they were capable of anything. The demands that accompanied these terrifying images were staggering, revealing the true scale of the criminal enterprise involved. The group demanded a sum of $5 million for Peter's release. However, in a twist that highlighted the dark intersection of finance and illicit trade, they offered an alternative. They would accept 5 kilograms of high-grade illicit substances, specifically cocaine or methamphetamine, in lieu of the cash. This was not a simple ransom, it was a high-level transaction. Yet, as the demands were issued, a disturbing reality began to surface. The messages and the ultimatums were not being sent to Peter's family. Instead, they were directed to a man named Tran Dinh, a known associate of Peter and a trader in the volatile world of cryptocurrency. Investigators quickly began to piece together a theory that made the tragedy even more heart-wrenching. Peter was likely never the primary target. Police intelligence suggested that Dinh was the individual the group had intended to pressure all along. Peter, it seemed, was merely a proxy and associate, caught in the crossfire of a dispute that had nothing to do with him. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time, enduring the consequences of a conflict rooted in a digital underworld he did not control. While Peter suffered in the darkness of the Belmore property, the recipient of the messages, Tran Dinh, was left holding the evidence of his friend's torment, knowing that the price for his safety was a fortune that few possessed. While Peter endured the slow passage of time in the darkness of the Belmore property, a frantic and high-stakes operation was mobilizing behind the scenes. The New South Wales Police had initiated a major response, bringing together detectives from Western Sydney and the elite State Crime Command. This joint effort, operating under the banner of a specialized task force, was engaged in a desperate race against the clock. However, despite the resources at their disposal, the investigators faced a terrifying obstacle. They were operating blindly. They knew a man had been taken, and they knew the demands were escalating, but they had absolutely zero intelligence on his physical location. The kidnappers had gone to ground, leaving no digital footprint and no trail to follow. The only tenuous leads available to the detectives were the harrowing images and videos being transmitted to Tran Dinh. These files were analyzed frame by frame by digital forensic experts, searching for any detail or reflection in a window, a unique pattern on a wall, or background noise that might betray the location. Yet, the images offered only brief, frustrating glimpses of a dilapidated interior that could have belonged to any one of thousands of abandoned structures scattered across Sydney's vast suburbs. With Peter's safety hanging by a thread and the captors growing increasingly impatient, police commanders realized they could not wait for a mistake. They had to force one. They conceived a plan that was as audacious as it was dangerous. They would use the intended target, Tran Dinh, as bait. In a carefully coordinated move, investigators convinced Dinh to re-engage with the kidnappers and agree to a partial payment. He was to offer $150,000 in cash, a fraction of the millions demanded, but enough to tempt the criminals into breaking cover. The meet was set for a public park in Bonnyrigg, a location that offered police the ability to establish a surveillance perimeter. It was a strategy fraught with risk. If the kidnappers sensed a trap, the consequences for Peter would likely be fatal. The tension during the drop was palpable. Under the watchful eyes of covert surveillance teams, the exchange took place. The kidnappers, driven by greed, and perhaps a false sense of security, emerged to collect the cash. They believed they were in control, unaware that their every move was being tracked from the shadows. As they departed with the money, they unwittingly led the police directly to their stronghold. Ground units and aerial surveillance tracked the target vehicle through the city streets, finally watching as it came to a halt at the rundown property on Canterbury Road in Belmore. The cage had been found. On March 14th, 6 days after Peter had been dragged from his bed, the waiting game ended. Dozens of heavily armed officers, including tactical response teams, converged on the house. The element of surprise was critical. Police Commissioner Karen Webb would later describe the decision to breach as calculated, but incredibly high risk. Utilizing flash acoustic devices to disorient the occupants, tactical teams stormed the building with overwhelming speed. The air filled with smoke and shouting as officers cleared room after room, neutralizing the threat before the captors could retaliate. Inside, amidst the squalor, they found Peter. He was alive, but the physical and psychological toll of his captivity was immediately evident. Paramedics rushed to stabilize him, transporting him to the hospital for urgent treatment, while police secured the scene. arresting 6 men, ranging in age from 19 to 21. The siege was over, but the unraveling of the conspiracy was just beginning. The raid on the Belmore property was a decisive victory for law enforcement, resulting in the immediate apprehension of 6 young men, the accused Diatsuna Tuino, Junior Siasao John Toto Fahamokioa, Viliami Siasao Valali Tonga, Lolo Liavaya, and Kito Tatafuere taken into custody, their operation dismantled in minutes. However, as the dust settled and the investigation deepened, it became clear that this cell of captors was merely the muscle. The network supporting this crime extended further than anyone initially suspected. As the days passed, the dragnet widened. Another suspect, Tial Menu Vifagala Alao, was intercepted by authorities at Sydney Airport, attempting to flee the jurisdiction before he could be linked to the crime. Esau Namoa, a man with a troubling family history involving serious criminal activity, was also swept up in the arrests. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come, a twist that exposed a terrifying vulnerability in the very systems designed to protect citizens. On April 12, weeks after the rescue, police executed an arrest in the car park of a budding store in Greenacre. The suspect was not a hardened criminal or a gang affiliate, but a 21-year-old woman named Ciara Elka. Her arrest sent shockwaves through the investigation. Because of her occupation, she was an employee of Service New South Wales. Detectives alleged that Elka had utilized her position within the government agency to access restricted, confidential databases. It was claimed that she had performed unauthorized searches to harvest sensitive personal data, including home addresses and license details for Tran Din, his wife, and even Peter Vuong's father. This intelligence was then allegedly funneled to her boyfriend at the time, Esau Namoa, effectively handing the kidnappers the keys to their targets' lives. The timing of her digital footprints was damning. Records showed she had accessed the transport database on February 20th, just prior to the first attack. And again on March 9th, the very day the successful abduction took place. In court, the evidence against the group was overwhelming. Phone intercepts captured conversations where Elka expressed fear about the legal consequences of her searches, to which Namoa reportedly replied with chilling clarity, "Of course it could, because someone got hurt over it." Further cementing the case was a piece of digital hubris found on Kito Tatafu's phone, a photograph of him brandishing a firearm with the caption "Payday got me like." Prosecutors asserted this was the same weapon used to terrorize Peter, and forensic analysis allegedly placed Tatafu's DNA inside the House of Horrors. The judicial outcomes varied. Some of the accused saw charges withdrawn, while others, like Valali Tonga, entered guilty pleas. Ciara Elka, facing the ruin of her reputation, eventually pleaded guilty to unauthorized access to data. She received an 18-month community correction order, the magistrate citing her lack of prior record and the enormous shame she had suffered. For the victims, however, the trauma did not end with the banging of a gavel. Tran Din, the man whose wealth had inadvertently painted a target on his friend's back, made a drastic decision. Fearing that the shadowy figures behind the plot were still at large, he liquidated his presence in Australia and fled overseas. It was a stark reminder that in the high-stakes world of cryptocurrency, security is often an illusion. This case stands as a grim milestone in Sydney's criminal history. It exposed the brutal lengths to which organized groups will go in pursuit of digital wealth, the fragility of personal privacy, and the devastating collateral damage inflicted on innocent lives. Peter Vuong survived the darkness, but the scars of those 6 days and the knowledge of how easily his life was breached will likely remain forever.